All right, guys, so this is one of my most requested and probably one of the most necessary videos that I'm ever going to put up on my channel about book folding. And that is going to be breaking down the different style of patterns for your book folding craft. So we're not talking about the way that you're going to fold your book. So that would be like your combi folds or your embossed folds or your inverted or shadow folds. Those are all styles of folds. We're going to be talking today about the style of pattern. And the reason that it's really important that you guys understand some of this terminology and understand the difference between these is because when you're buying or downloading patterns, whether it be from Etsy or a web page or a Facebook group, I think there's a lot of confusion out there because there's so many different things and so many different words that go into it. So when we're talking pattern style as opposed to fold, but we're talking pattern style, we're going to be talking about what it is that you actually print out, that you hold in front of you or you have up on your screen or whatever it is that tells you how you're going to mark your book. So this is really the first step in understanding book folding, is understanding your pattern style. As far as patterns go, there's really two main styles, and then there's kind of nuances within those styles that we're going to talk about. So the first style that we're going to talk about is going to be your table patterns. These are going to be the types of patterns that come in a table format. Now, every book folding software, every designer, uses a different software or may use a different software to create their patterns. So some of the formatting might look a little bit different. The way that the things look might be a little bit different. But for the most part, the information contained within them is going to be the same, and that's what we're focusing on today. So the first table style that we're going to talk about is a single decimal place style pattern. Now, these are the most inaccurate. We're going to go from the most inaccurate to the most accurate precision or the smoothest designs that you can get. The single decimal style, I would say, is the most common style out there, but it's kind of quickly fading at this point because, again, it is the most inaccurate. So when you look at your pattern, sometimes they may be labeled as a single decimal place. Most of the time, they're just not going to be labeled. They're just kind of your run-of-the-mill book folding patterns. And the way that you're going to be able to identify them is when you go to look at your table. So we have a partial table down here. We have the next part of the table here. You're going to look at your values. So these are going to be the points in which you are going to mark on your pages in order to create your design. So for the table style, they require a ruler in centimeters/millimeter accuracy. And you're going to measure to these points. Now, if you look, there's 16.3. So that's a single decimal place or a single decimal number after your decimal point. That's why they're often referred to as a single decimal place pattern. So this one's 16.1, 19.1, 6.4, 8.3. You guys get the gist. Basically, there's only ever going to be one number after the decimal place. Now, the next style pattern, also in table form, is going to be a 2 decimal place pattern. And basically the only difference is how accurate the pattern gets measured. So instead of having only 1 decimal place after the decimal, you're going to have 2 numbers after the decimal place. So you're going to end up with numbers such as 17.65. So I have a whole nother video breaking down exactly how to mark these style patterns if it's intimidating to you. But basically the long and the short of it, guys, is you're just going to take your ruler. If you have an Incra ruler, one of those style, they actually have a hole for 6.5, and you'll find it halfway between 17.6 and 17.7. If you have a conventional style ruler, that's totally fine. You can still mark this style pattern, this 2 decimal place pattern, by just finding your 17.6 and your 17.7 and placing a mark roughly halfway between the two values. So because you're getting values that are also in between your whole millimeters, because that's what these are your millimeter marks, because you're getting numbers that are in between your millimeters, we're getting a more accurate pattern. So on things like a curve, like we have at the top of this kind of awareness ribbon, the image is going to be smoother because you're marking on whole values or single decimal places, as well as the 2 decimal place, which is even more accurate. So it's going to allow for smoother transitions. It's going to allow for smoother text within your imagery. It's just a lot more accurate because you're more accurately marking your book. Okay, so again, no crazy special tools are needed for this 2 decimal place. I know they seem a little bit intimidating, but again, you just mark halfway between the values. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but with everything in a new craft, that's what happens. So you'll get in the rhythm of it. It's not that bad, I promise. Okay, so that's going to be basically your 2 styles of table patterns. You're going to have your single decimal place, which is the 1 single decimal place after your decimal, and your 2 decimal place, which means you're going to have the more accurate version, which is going to be that halfway point. Now, one other kind of thing I want to touch on quickly is most 2 decimal place patterns. I'm not going to say all, because there are some crazy people out there that create table patterns that don't follow this rule, but most 2 decimal place patterns are going to be rounded to the nearest 5. So it's either going to be, like, prime example, 17.6, or it's going to be 17.65. So like this would be a fairly small cut. It's basically going to be the end of this ribbon here, but you're never going to end up with a crazy number like 17.49. It's always going to be either a 5 or basically the imaginary 0 that would go next to that number. So they're rounded to the nearest 5. Okay, so you're only going to be marking halfway between those millimeter points. Okay, like I said, there are some designers out there that put in table form like a 17.66 style pattern. Basically, with those patterns, if you happen to come across one, if that is kind of the case, you can either round it to the nearest whole number, or you can round it to the nearest 5, like these are, if you're looking to make your pattern more accurate. All right. So that is going to be one kind of style of pattern. I know we talked about like the nuances within this style, but this style is a table pattern. Now, again, we're not talking about fold, because this could be folded as a cut and fold inverted, a cut and fold embossed. It could be a combi. It could be all those different things. But the pattern style is going to be a table, either single or 2 decimal place pattern. So the next style, or the other style that is out there, is called a graph style pattern. Now, graph style patterns they were really, really popular when book folding first started a long time ago. And they're gaining more popularity now because they're super easy to use. Now, for those that have been book folding for a while and are used to using a table style pattern, you're going to notice that there is a lot more accuracy within your graph style pattern versus your table, because there's no actual measuring, which is, I think, why they're gaining popularity, because they're a lot easier to do. There's no special tools required, including a ruler. There's absolutely no measuring, and they're a little bit easier on your eyes because, again, you're not trying to mark in between these itty bitty little marks on your ruler. Everything is printed out. Everything gets lined up to your book page. But again, it's a lot more user friendly. If you're trying to teach a child how to do this, this is definitely the easier way to go about doing that. If you are visually impaired, this is definitely going to be easier for you. So I think it just is a little bit more all around friendly. Again, it's going to take a little bit of time and practice to transition from table style to graph style. If, you know, you're used to a table style, like anything else, it takes some getting used to. But I find that most people, even if they're used to table, after doing their first graph pattern, they're blown away at how much faster they are and how much more accurate they are. So most people tend to make the switch. So with graph style patterns, instead of having a table of numerical values or a table of numbers, you're going to have the actual image expanded out onto your sheet of paper. So it's going to look something like this. So you can see that we have stars, you can see that we have letters. So instead of having the numbers, you actually have the image, but in expanded form. Now, if you're not familiar with how to mark a graph style pattern, I have a whole separate video. Just search for my introduction or intro to graph style patterns, and that will come up. I'll also link it in the description box below once it's up here. But again, this is what a graph style pattern is going to look like. So within graph style patterns, just like within table style patterns, we kind of have two formats or two orientations of your pattern. And it all depends on how it is that you physically like to mark your book. So most of us, when looking at a book, let me grab one here, are going to be familiar with how we like to mark our book, whether the orientation of our book is going to be spine in, meaning that the spine is going to face us in toward your belly, or you're going to have the spine facing away from you and the book page is kind of opening up in front of you. So with the graph style pattern, the orientation of the pattern can be changed to better suit you with how you fold. So if you fold with the spine in toward your belly, you're going to want a spine in pattern. If you fold with the spine away from you, you're going to want the spine away version of the pattern. Depending on who you get your pattern from and what program they use to create their patterns, you may also see it, as top of page to left or top of page to right. And basically what that means, instead of being labeled a spine in, it may be labeled as a top of page to left. And what that means is when you print your pattern, the top of your page, when the book is facing in toward your belly, the top of your page, the top of your book page, the top of your pattern page is going to be orientated to your left. So I've started doing the spine in versus spine away because the top of page to left versus top of page to right was getting a little confusing for people. But depending on who you get your pattern from, they may label it differently. So I want you guys to have all the information. So if you're a spine in, it's also known as a top of page to left. This pattern is a spine away or a top of page to right. So when I look at my pattern, the top of my page is on my right. So if I have my book and it's spine away and I open it, the top of my page is on my right-hand side, which is also going to be how my pattern is. The top of my page is going to be on my right. So it's just a little bit helpful for you to know how you fold your patterns, or realistically, not even so much how you fold them, but how you mark them. I know lots of people that fold their book a certain way and lots of people that mark it a different way. I happen to be one of them. I tend to mark a lot of my books with the spine in toward me, and I tend to fold them with the spine away. If you're one of those people, you need to know how you mark your book because you're only using your pattern as you mark it. So I would print the spine the spine in version because I mark my book with the spine in toward myself. So again, it doesn't really matter either way. The pattern itself is exactly the same. The orientation of the pattern itself is flipped. And as long as the top of your book corresponds to the top of your pattern, your image will come out the same either way. Okay, so that's a graph pattern. Now, there's no accuracy as far as like single or double or, decimal places, because there's no marking individual numbers. So graph patterns are going to be crazy more accurate than even your two decimal place style patterns, because you're actually marking along your pattern instead of measuring to those values. So you can get a lot more accurate. You can mark at, say, a 16.66 or, whatever that happens to be, whereas trying to use a ruler to measure to that value is going to be extremely difficult to get accurate. So that's graph style. So spine in or top of page to left, spine away, top of page to right. And the last thing I want to talk about quickly is multi-layer patterns. So I'm going to quickly talk about graph style first, since I have it in front of me. And basically the way that you're going to know that it's a multi-layer graph pattern is because it's going to be color coded. So instead of having a preview image that looks like this and a pattern that is solid black or a solid color, you're going to have a preview that's multicolored, and you're going to have a pattern that is colored. So we have blue parts, black parts, red parts. That means that this is a multi-layer pattern. Now, I have a separate video showing how to take a single layer and make it into a multi-layer pretty easily. And basically you're just going to color the pieces of your pattern to suit whatever style fold it is that you want to do. The other thing is when you go to kind of look at your pattern, if it has an image instead of a preview pattern, if it has an image of a folded book, instead of this, if you look at the pattern itself and it's a single color, then you know that it's going to be a single layer. For multi-layers with table style, there's going to be two different kind of ways that you're going to see them. They're either going to be a single pattern, so just like this in a table, either single or two decimal place, but they're going to be color-coded numbers. So you'd have like some red values, some blue values, some orange values, whatever the case is, but the pattern itself is going to be color-coded into however many layers there are. Or you're going to see some table style patterns that do them as two separate patterns. So you'll have like a layer 1, and that entire pattern is going to be pages 1 through however many pages are in the pattern. And it's going to have all of the numbers, all of the values that you're going to need to mark for that first layer. Then you're going to have a separate pattern, a pattern 2 or a layer 2 pattern that's going to have pages 1 through whatever, that is going to have all of the values that you need to fold to your second depth, and then your third depth and your fourth depth, and however long that may go for. So it's either going to be one pattern and it's going to be all color coded, or it's going to be multiple separate patterns, all with the pages that are going to kind of sort it by layer or print it by layer. So those are the two main kind of ways. There's a few others out there, but it's very rare that you're going to come across them. But that will be your multi-layer kind of thing. So if you download a table pattern and you start seeing a bunch of patterns within the same file, that means it's probably a multi-layer pattern. And again, reach out to the designer and talk to them if you have any questions. But I hope that clarifies at least some of the confusion, some of the questions. So again, when you go to order a custom, or you go to Etsy, or you go to download something, you're going to want to know whether you're downloading a table style or a graph style, and the accuracy of the table style if you're going to do table, single or two decimal. And you're also going to want to know which orientation to print if it's going to be graph style. So spine in or top of page to left or spine away, top of page to right. And then again, if you're going for a multi-layer, you're going to want to know kind of what you're getting yourself into and what you're most comfortable with. Most pattern designers will offer both versions of a table, whether it's a single table but color-coded or 2 patterns. And again, with the graph style, they're just automatically color-coded. So again, I hope that kind of clears up any confusion, takes some of the pain away from it. It's very simple. It's just breaking it down to understand it. And feel free to leave any questions that you have in the comment section below.